On our last day in Jerusalem, we went back through the Ottoman walls into the Old City and visited a building on the southern plateau of Mount Zion, which is said to contain not only the room to which Jesus and the disciples retired for the Last Supper, but also the tomb of King David. The building, like many in Jerusalem's Old City, has a storied and contentious history, and was partially destroyed and rebuilt countless times. The current structure stands on the foundation of the Aya Zion, a church that is said to have hosted a Jewish Christian congregation from the 100s to the 400s AD. In the very early years of Islam, the building was taken and used as a mosque. Crusaders took the site, and by 1332, it was being used as the headquarters for Franciscans in Jerusalem. By 1429, the Muslims reclaimed the first floor and used it as a mosque again, but highlighting the instability that marks the area to this day, it was returned just a year later. The building changed hands many times over the following century, until Suleiman the Magnificent took it entirely for the Muslims in 1523. During this time, it was one of the most important Muslim shrines in Jerusalem. It remained under Muslim control until 1948, when it was taken by the Israeli government. During this period, it was one of the preeminent sites for Jewish worship in the city, because between 1948 and 1967, Jewish prayer at sites in the Old City, such as the Western Wall, was forbidden by the Jordanian administration. Strangely, the site was important for the Jews not primarily because of the room of the Last Supper or King David's tomb, but because from the roof of the building, the Temple Mount is visible. Jews would pray from the roof, looking towards the Temple Mount. During this time, the site was actually considered to be the holiest in all of Israel for Jews. Today, the site is revered by all three Abrahamic religions and is open to everyone. While we were there, we heard a solemn chant being sung by an Eastern Orthodox congregation, Jewish pilgrims praying at King David's sarcophagus, and we exchanged greetings with other evangelical Christian visitors to the site. Despite this incredible history, our visit left a few among us unimpressed.
I got really very little meaning out of the upper room. Again, it wasn't so much I was put off by it, but rather I had been predisposed by Joel, who had already told us where he thought it was. So I just sort of dismissed it.
That was another site that I wasn't really thrilled about. I mean, it was a room that was built by the Crusaders. It may be on the location of the Last Supper, but it was not the room of the Last Supper.
In addition, very few historians or archaeologists believe that King David really was buried on the first floor, and the site is currently called a cenotaph, a monument to someone who is buried elsewhere. So, what significance does the site still have for us today? It is itself a living monument to the chaos which exists in the region, featuring a hodgepodge of Muslim tile, Catholic stained glass, and Jewish Torah scrolls. It's a pile of stones that tells a complicated story, and a snapshot of the history of the Holy City.
We're standing here on top of the traditional site for the Last Supper. We don't know the exact location, but we're right in the immediate environment of where this happened. This area, it's on the outer boundaries of the city of Jerusalem during the New Testament period. This was the eve of his arrest. Things were tense, there were spies looking for him, and so he would have found a remote location, a private location to share the Last Supper with his disciples. In the scripture, when it describes in Mark, Jesus gave them instruction by answering their question, "Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, 'Where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready." The disciples set out, went to the city, and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Two things that are significant given the delicateness, the tension of his imminent arrest. There's a question raised here. Was this just supernatural prediction of a detail that came to pass exactly as Jesus said it? Or was there a prearranged meeting, and the signal was a man carrying a jar, which Jesus points out? And think about it, that would have been out of character, because it would typically have been a woman who would have carried the water jar. Whichever it is, that's not to diminish Jesus' predictive ability, but it's just simply to say that things were arranged. And so this is where we celebrate to this day the Lord's Supper. And it began as a Passover, but it now becomes the Passover, if you will, of the new covenant, that now a new era has broken in the history of redemption.